Masmara.
Mohammad Reza had to come up with a solution. General Ali Razmara. The general was a passionate man and believed that Iran should be ruled by a harsh tyrant, such as himself. To the British, he promised quick passage of the supplemental agreement. To the Russians, freedom for the Tudeh leaders. To the Americans, sympathetic ear and support in their anti-communist crusade. But Razmara was unsuccessful. An influential mullah by the name of Ayatollah Abulus Kazem Kashami shared Mossadegh's views of the British. The two denounced the supplemental agreement, and on November 25th, his parliamentary committee unanimously voted against the agreement. Razmara's failure was emphasized by his assassination on March 7, 1951. The day after Razmara's death, Mossadegh's oil committee, by unanimous vote, recommended that the Majlis nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. On the 15th of March, every Majlis member voted in favor of nationalization. Mossadegh was Iran's most loved man. On the 28th of April 1951, Mossadegh was voted Prime Minister of Iran. He was now at the pinnacle point of power.
Mossadegh is Prime Minister. Avril Harriman, an American diplomat, was sent to Tehran in 1951 to mediate negotiations between the Iranians and the Brits. Along with Harriman came Walter J. Levy, a petroleum expert. Levy was against nationalizing of the oil company because almost no Iranians were trained for administrative and technical positions, and Iran had no tankers. He said that Iran would soon fall into economic chaos unless they allowed the Brits to keep control. But Mossadegh didn't care at all. All he wanted was that the British were out of Iran. He was stubborn as an mule. Ayatollah Kashani was just as inexplicably stubborn. Mossadegh also talked to Sir Richard Stokes, an elitist Brit. Stokes was told to deliver the message that the British were willing to share the profits on a 50-50 basis. Mossadegh was unwilling to hear him out. The Brits then placed sanctions on Iran over their sugar and steel imports, and withdrew many British personnel from the Iranian oil fields. They even considered taking military actions against Iran. During this time, as Britain tightened its noose, Iran was in political turmoil. Moderates thought that Mossadegh was crazy, while radicals thought that he wasn't crazy enough.
On October 8, 1951, Mossadegh landed in New York City. He promised to tell the world of a cruel and imperialistic company that was exploiting a needy and naked people, the Iranians. In one corner, we had what the West thought of as a frail old senile lunatic, Mossadegh. And in the other corner, we had Gladwin Jebb, a British delegate. Mossadegh, however, was an eloquent lawyer, and on October 15th, he quickly asserted that the British had no rights to Iranian oil in a Security Council meeting. He found word that stung his adversary and delighted his admirers. The British were trying to persuade world opinion that the lamb had devoured the wolf. For 4 days, Mossadegh and Jebb went back and forth over the issue, but neither party was willing to yield. On October 19th, the council voted to postpone the discussion of the question to a certain day or indefinitely. This meant that neither Mossadegh nor Jebb had won, but Mossadegh had shown the world that he was a lot more than what they thought of him. After this trip to New York, Mossadegh then traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Truman. He did this to discuss the issue of Iran's oil nationalization. However, talks didn't solve the problem between Iran and the UK.
Mossadegh's ruse.
In 1952, Mossadegh asked the Shah to give up control of the army. The Shah resisted, and as a result, Mossadegh resigned from his role as the prime minister. He was gambling. He wanted to know whether Iran really wanted him as a leader. The British then chose Ahmed Kavam to be prime minister. Not surprisingly, the Shah gave in to British demands and instated Kavam. When Iranians learned that Mossadegh was out of power, huge protests erupted. "Death or Mossadegh," they cried. Only 4 days after being elected, Kavam was ousted and Mossadegh was reinstated. Mossadegh now knew that his nation was behind him.
Coup! Coup! Then, in 1952, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a Republican, was elected to office. He had run on an anti-communist platform and therefore was expected to fight communism anywhere it appeared. One of the places that many of his cabinet members and aides told him that it was appearing was in Iran. Having obtained the Shah's agreement and $1 million to help in any way possible to bring about the fall of Mossadegh, the coup, named Operation Ajax, was organized by the CIA and MI6 under Kermit Roosevelt, the grandson of Theodore, the Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, and his brother Allen Dulles, the Director of Central Intelligence. Roosevelt's first order of business was to get the Shah to issue a firman, which is a royal decree, dismissing Mossadegh and appointing General Zahedi as prime minister. But plans didn't go as well as they thought they would. On Saturday, August 15th, Colonel Nematollah Nasiri delivered the firman to Mossadegh. Mossadegh had already been warned of the plot, and instead, he simply had Nasiri arrested. He claimed that the Shah had no constitutional right to issue an order for the election of a prime minister without the consent of the Majlis. The action was publicized, and the Shah, humiliated, fled to Rome. The coup was a failure. The end.
Just kidding. Although many US officials and the CIA in Washington ordered Kermit Roosevelt to leave Iran immediately and forget about the coup, Roosevelt decided to stay in Iran and plan a second coup in the span of a couple days. On August 19th, 1953, Kermit Roosevelt tried again. In the wee hours of the morning, Roosevelt took General Zahedi to the villa of a fellow agent to be hidden. Roosevelt's new plan was to bribe more politicians, mullahs, and influential Iranians to speak out against Mossadegh, and then he would try to put General Zahedi back into power. Roosevelt ordered Ambassador Henderson to meet with Mossadegh to tell him that Americans in Iran were being mistreated. Mossadegh consequently ordered policemen to put an end to the demonstrations because he really liked Americans and he liked being a good host. Surprisingly, Mossadegh had no clue that the Americans were up to another coup, and that by curbing his supporters, he actually gave Roosevelt the clear path to create havoc and destruction in Mossadegh's name. This time, Roosevelt made sure he had an extraordinary mob. From street thugs to bodybuilders, thousands of demonstrators looted shops, destroyed pictures of the Shah, ransacked the offices of royalist groups, and shouted pro-Shah slogans. Every one of the city squares was occupied by hundreds of soldiers and civilians. Soon enough, the city was all against Mossadegh. The country was too. Soon enough, Zahedi was proclaiming his victory over Iranian radio. And bam! He was appointed prime minister.
Zahedi in power.
A few days after the coup, Zahedi ordered Mossadegh transferred to a military prison. Mossadegh was charged with 3 years in prison, followed by house arrest for life. Hussein Fatimi, who was Mossadegh's foreign minister, was singled out for exemplary punishment. He was executed in November of 1954. Anglo-Iranian changed its name to British Petroleum, and an international consortium was organized to assume the rich concession. The shares of the oil were split among the British, Americans, Dutch, and the Français.